Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Come on, we can do better than that. I know it's after lunch. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
All right. Well, at least we know they're all awake at the start of this. This is an exciting topic that we're going to talk about because oftentimes when you're off busy doing the work, you don't necessarily identify with the consequences that go along with the work out of the care and commitment you each put into doing the work. And so what I'm going to do is we're going to start with Josh kind of giving a summary of his article that if you haven't read it, it is such an incredible read that regardless of where you find yourself in this work, you're going to find that space and that place that you're going to say, oh yeah, I knew that, now it's confirmed. And then we'll hear from Sarita and Krista a little bit about the work that each of you all do. And then we're just going to talk about, and I'll tell you a little bit about the intersection of my life that gets me here at this point in time. Josh?
All right, well, thank you. I'm just really excited to be here, and thank you all for sticking around after lunch and not napping, which would be totally understandable. So, because I am trained and socialized as a professor, I'm incapable of not writing out a lecture and giving it. But I promise I'm going to keep this under 5 minutes. So I want to summarize the article that sort of generated us meeting together. So in late 2014, I approached the owner of a bail company in a large urban county. I told him I wanted to understand his industry from the ground up, to learn how to succeed as a bail bond agent. He was receptive, and after a few conversations, he hired me. Over the next year and a half, I worked as a bail bond agent, engaging in the same activities as my coworkers. If you're interested in the research and some of the key findings, there are links on the conference app tagged onto this session with several articles, including The Debt of Care. Along with the articles, I'm currently writing a book with my colleague at the University of Minnesota, Joe Sauce. Our book, Preying on the Poor, Criminal Justice as Revenue Racket, analyzes the dramatic growth of monetized criminal justice practices that together extract billions of dollars from disadvantaged communities. These practices include court fines and fees, prison and community supervision charges, asset forfeiture, jail and prison profiteering, commercial bail, and more. In this project, we study the criminal justice field as a site of predation, rather than just viewing it through the more typical lens of crime and punishment. We use the term predatory to refer to practices that leverage groups' vulnerabilities, needs, and aspirations for purposes of mining revenues that go to government and private companies. Since the 1910s, bail has offered a template for how the machinery of criminal prosecution can generate revenues. In the book, we analyze how race, class, and gender intersect with law and legal practices to shape how predation operates. While working as a bail agent, I gained a deeper appreciation of the central role gender plays in guiding extraction. Very briefly, here's what I mean. As people here likely know, bail companies typically require a co-signer for each bond they issue. Almost anyone can pay the premium, but co-signers usually must be at least 21 years old and have a decent paying job. When I started working bail, I saw that the vast majority of defendants were men, while the vast majority of people co-signing and footing the bill were women, primarily low-income women of color. At some point or another, I mentioned this observation to nearly all of my coworkers, and without exception, they found it unremarkable. It seemed both natural and obvious to them that it would be mostly women stepping up to take care of defendants. As agents recruited co-signers, they saw the field through a gendered lens, based on their intuitive grasp of what sociologists call the social organization of care. Our managers regularly instructed us to start by asking defendants, "What's mom's name and number?" Mothers, nearly everyone assumed, would care enough to bail out their children and make sure they showed up for court. Grandmothers and long-term romantic partners ranked second best, good, but not quite as reliable. Men co-signed often enough that bail agents were not surprised by their involvement, yet agents rarely mentioned men when discussing best options. In cases where friends and family were reluctant to bail out a defendant, agents used a variety of care-based strategies to lock in a cosigner. By describing jail conditions as horrible, dangerous, and unhealthy, for example, agents try to evoke fear and guilt in potential cosigners who felt a duty to care. Defendants sometimes did the same, leveraging expectations about carrying responsibilities to push specific people to bail them out. Calls from jail tend to be costly, and most bail companies allow inmates to call them for free. So it was routine for defendants to call our office and ask an agent to contact a possible cosigner. In such cases, defendants might implore agents to stress the harms they would suffer if they remained in jail, from losing a job to not receiving medications or getting victimized by prisoners or staff. Defendants hoped agents would depict a scene of desperation and convey that their well-being depended in a singular way on the person who had received the call. In short, because women are expected to be primary caregivers in the broader society, players in the bail game, owners, agents, and defendants alike, look to women first, hoping and expecting that they will bail out the incarcerated individual. By understanding how the gendered ethics of care are woven throughout the fabric of commercial bail, we can better explain how bail agents succeed in their work and why cosigners take on such significant burdens. By taking on these responsibilities, it's important to emphasize, women go into debt and become subjected to monitoring and badgering by bail companies. And in the process, an immense amount of wealth gets transferred from disadvantaged communities to bail businesses and the large insurance corporations that underwrite them. Done. With time to spare, right? Thanks.
Sarita.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, guys, for having me here today. I come to this stage as a formerly incarcerated woman. I went to prison at the age of 19, and I was released at the age of 29. The same things that led most women to prison was trauma, and that was definitely my case as well, irrespective of the socioeconomic background that my parents and myself came from. At the time, my father was a supervisor at an oil refinery, and my mom was a judge. So that alone lets you know that no one is exempt from going to prison. Specifically, what brings me to this stage today is that at Operation Restoration, I'm the executive director, started the organization and formalized into a 501c3 about 2016, but I had been doing the work and helping all of the women that I left behind for a great time, because that's what drives you, the people that you left behind, the faces, the individuals that you've come into contact with, and you know how amazing and extraordinary that they are. And being located in New Orleans, Louisiana, in the state of Louisiana, there isn't a lot of help for women specifically. As my colleague on the stage mentioned earlier, it's a lot of times that women post bonds for their significant other, but what they don't say is that the incarceration rate of women has risen 840% over the last 40 years, and if we don't inherently believe that the women today are worse than the women 40 years ago, we really have to look at what we're criminalizing. And my staff, we have 11 full-time employees, 18 contract employees across the country. 80% is formerly incarcerated, but what we notice is that when women go to prison, they have no one to call. So they don't make it to the bail bonds in the bail industry. They actually sit in jails and in prison, and they end up taking plea bargains or some form of electronic monitoring because they need to get out and get to the kids, because a lot of those households are single-parent households with women at the head of those houses. So for us, we really focus on what are the root causes that bring women to prison, women and girls. We work inside of the state prison in Louisiana. We also work inside of the juvenile facility with young girls. We also work with the formerly incarcerated individuals. We really work on changing language and allowing people to see people as people. We always lead with people first language. We don't use terms like ex-con, inmate, those things, because people don't want to help ex-cons and inmates. People want to help people. So really figuring out how we can bring the humanistic view back into how we are talking and discussing those particular individuals first. But secondly, we have a court monitoring I guess I don't want to say it's a program because it's so much more than a program, but we employ 6 formerly incarcerated women to go inside of the New Orleans court system. So we have the magistrate court, we have criminal court, and we have municipal court in New Orleans. And we created a data tool, a tool to actually see if the judges were in compliance with the Supreme Court ruling of making sure that they consider a defendant's ability to pay prior to setting bail or setting bond. Our court system is a unique one in New Orleans. The court was 100% dependent on fines and fees. That was how our court was run for every single thing that the court needed. So we have a fee for everything. We have a lab fee, a crime fee, a DA fee, a public defender fee, a court fee. I mean, there are at least about, I think, 40 fees associated with going into the criminal injustice system in New Orleans. But this data tool that we created, it takes into account defendants' race all the way down to a color palette. You know, women like makeup sometimes and color palettes, so they can circle the color if they're unsure of the defendant's race to see if a lighter complected person fares better than a darker complected person. You know, the ethnicity of an individual if they're able to determine, but really get into the root of how Black and brown people are treated in the criminal system as it relates to bail, fines, and fees in New Orleans. Other questions that it asks are if they're represented by a private attorney versus a public defender. Some of the trends that we've been seeing is that clients fare a lot better if they have a private attorney because the private attorney and the judges are somehow friends and they have sidebar conversations. And they're able to win the freedom or secure the freedom of an individual, getting charges dropped, or things like that. So we are working in conjunction with the MacArthur Justice Center in New Orleans to provide the data and the information along with a lot of other groups who are at the table where we're really over the last year have been focusing on bail, fines, and fees in New Orleans and how that affects, you know, families. But for us particularly, we know that women bear the burden of bail, fines, and fees if they are involved or if they're involved through a loved one. So really bringing to the forefront like what the actual effect is on the families and the community as a whole.
Krista.
Hi, everyone. I'm Krista Brown, and as Sharice mentioned, I work for the Treasurer and Tax Collector for the City and County of San Francisco. You might be wondering why someone from the Treasurer and Tax Collector's office is here, which is fair. But since our Treasurer started his term in office, he actually has been in office for almost 15 years now, he really wanted to use his position as an elected gay Latino man holding such a powerful role in charge of revenue and debt collection on behalf of the entire city and county to create opportunities to build wealth for communities that had historically been shut out of the financial mainstream. And so over the last 15 years, our office has worked to negotiate with banks and credit unions to create accounts that actually work for people with low incomes. We've cracked down on payday lenders and on check cashers. We automatically open a college savings account for every kindergartner entering our school district, and we seed it with $50, and we match the savings of low-income children and their families. So really looking to build wealth in communities and in neighborhoods that have been disenfranchised over the last generations in our community. But I would say about 3 years ago, we were confronted with the fact that this wasn't enough. In the wake of Ferguson and the shooting of Michael Brown, the Department of Justice released a report outlining how the city of Ferguson was really balancing their budget on the backs of low-income people and communities of color through fines and fees. And around the same time in San Francisco, a coalition of organizations came together, legal aid providers, reentry service providers, people who were advocating for people struggling with homelessness, and they formed a group called Debt Free San Francisco. And they started sounding the alarm that this wasn't just a Ferguson problem, it was happening here in San Francisco. They talked about how a single ticket for sleeping on the sidewalk was $200, and if you couldn't pay it, it grew to $500 with late fees, and then your driver's license was suspended, and then a warrant was issued for your arrest. And just the cascade of consequences that would set in simply for being unable to pay a fine or a fee or a ticket. And our office started to grapple with, over the last 15 years, we've really tried to work and assess and reform the unequal ways in which government has shaped how wealth has been built, but we hadn't been addressing the unequal ways in which government was stripping wealth. And so we had to have that conversation. So we ended up convening a task force with city and county departments, with impacted people, and with community groups, really identifying what are the pain points that we need to address, what are the biggest issues that we should be talking about, and then in coalition with all of those groups, starting to push forward reforms. So over the last 3 years, we've implemented new reforms where you can actually discount your traffic tickets based on your ability to pay, based on your income. We have new low-income tow discounts and parking ticket discounts. We're doing a lot of work on child support debt. Last year, we announced that we were eliminating many of the fees that people are charged with when they exit the justice system. So monthly probation fees, fingerprinting fees, sentencing fees, public defender fees, electronic monitoring fees. We eliminated all of the ones under our jurisdiction, and we waived $33 million in debt that was hanging over San Francisco families from those fees, really finding that not only is it wrong to fund the system on the backs of people who can't afford to pay it, but it's also a really terrible source of revenue because they have no income to pay it at all, so you generate very little revenue. And then just last month, in partnership with some of the folks here in the room, we announced that we are making all phone calls from our county jail free. And we are also ending the practice of marking up items in the jail commissary. So we will no longer be generating revenue for our jail on the backs of the families of people who are incarcerated. But the reason I'm here today, one of the pain points that was really brought forward early on in the task force was the system of money bail, and how you are essentially asking people in a deep moment of crisis to sign a binding financial contract, and how big of an issue that was in San Francisco. And in San Francisco, we had pretrial diversion and diversion programs since 1975, so we did have other options, but still every year thousands of people were signing bail contracts. And so the community groups asked us to take a look at this from the financial perspective on behalf of the money guy. And so we started talking to a lot of community groups and impacted individuals. We gathered data from the sheriff, from the courts, from the public defender and the district attorney, and we released a report called Do the Math, Money Bail Doesn't Add Up for San Francisco. And I just want to call out a few specific things, which I don't think the themes will surprise any of you, but some of the numbers might. The first thing that we found is that, again, this isn't a surprise, this is a major financial justice issue in San Francisco. The average bail amount in San Francisco is $56,000. We're actually higher than the state average of $50,000. The median bail amount is right around $50,000 in San Francisco. And unsurprisingly, what we found in the research is that 99.9% of people who post bail have to do so through a surety, so using a private bail bond company where they're paying or signing a contract to pay 10% of that amount that they will never get back. So that's, on average, $5,600. And so as we started digging deeper into that, we realized every year in San Francisco, our city has a population of less than 900,000 people. And every year in San Francisco, communities were paying $10 to $15 million a year in non-refundable bail fees alone. So it's a huge financial justice issue. The amount of wealth that you can kind of put into a community was just being extracted back through these non-refundable bail fees. The second thing we found is that, again, this isn't a surprise, but this is a racial justice issue. That $15 million was not being paid out equally across the city in San Francisco. Due to over-policing and a variety of other factors, the African American population in our city is less than 5%, but more than 50% of our county jail. and almost 40% of the people who were posting bonds. And so what we saw is that if you look at it on a per capita basis, the average white person in San Francisco was paying $10 a year in bail fees. The average African American person was paying more than 10 times that amount per capita. And interestingly, when you look at it by zip code, how many folks are familiar with redlining, practice of redlining? So redlining is essentially, the government drew maps which directed banks. They would insure banks based on, they would kind of draw lines around specific neighborhoods, and they would insure banks based on their level of risk, and they determine level of risk based on race and ethnicity. It was not actually about actual levels of risk, but they drew maps based on race and ethnicity. So when you lay over the map of where bail bonds are posted and which neighborhoods were redlined, it's almost a one-for-one match. It's almost exact. So it's a financial justice issue, it's a racial justice issue, and it's also very clear, as has been brought up many times, that it's a gender justice issue. I spoke with quite a few bail bond agents who said, just like Josh said, the first thing they were instructed to do when someone called, can you call your mother? Can you call your grandmother? Can you call your girlfriend? Like, what women in your life have any assets that they could hand over? Jewelry, houses, whatever it is, what can we hand over? And I was able, bail bond contracts are not public, which is something we could talk about later. But I was able to review quite a few of them in partnership with our public defender's office, and 100% of the contracts that I reviewed, the co-signers were a woman. And so I think there's a lot of work to be done, and I'm glad to be part of the conversation and in this room working with you all on this.
Well, thank you. Let's give it up for our panelists. And you can see the depth and breadth which has gone in to bring this session before us today. So I'm Helen Holton. I'm a recovered elected official. I spent 21 years as a member of the Baltimore City Council. I was in office when Freddie Gray died. I've also been a bail bonds woman while serving as an elected official and beginning to see the bifurcated reality in which we live. That if you have no dealings with the law or arrest, you don't understand there's a whole subculture that's based on cash money, profits, follow the dollars. Let's look at what it is. And at the end of the day, it's a system that really supports the notion of white supremacy. And so I'm going to say this, it's not to be, I'm just going to put it out there. Every time I hear, let's make America great again, I hear, let's restore white power in a way that we don't see it as prolific as it used to be. That's Helen's opinion. That's what I hear when I hear that. But the reality is, it's a system that's in place that no longer serves the reality of the America that we are. And it won't change unless we as individuals step up to do something to change it. You got to stop hearing the rhetoric and saying, oh, what a shame. Oh, that's interesting. And walk out and think, oh, well, yeah, let me get on with my life and what I do. What I know is that in this room are people who care deeply about what's happening in our criminal justice system. And as Josh started out with intersectionality, it's the same thing. You can't look at these issues as isolated issues to address. They're all connected and related. And so I'm reminded of Kimberly Crenshaw, who coined the term intersectionality 30 years ago, to talk about and describe the overlap of layered social identities that you cannot pick apart and choose which one you want and which one you don't. It's a package deal. And so we have to begin to address the underlying root causes of what has brought us to this place where we find ourselves today. And so I'm going to start off with a question that each of you alluded to, but I'm going to give it language that takes it to a higher level when I say socio-cultural implications of where we find ourselves today. We know what the problem is. What is the solution that's going to right the injustice that we're living in daily? Okay, don't everybody jump up.
So I was really trying to give them a chance to answer first. I'm gonna give y'all a little secret about me. When I have something to say and I'm like fighting inside of myself not to like jump, I get to rocking, I get to moving. And people who have seen me speak before, they kind of like, Sarita, jump, go. So to answer your question, I think for me, everybody doesn't know what the problem is, right? So I started with that assumption when I first started doing this work. I was always so upset and I was so angry and mad about people not understanding like the plight of women and black women in particular in the system and how it's set up. But what I found over and over as I travel this country is that a lot of people are just out of touch. So for me, when you made the comment about the Make America Great Again or whatever, what really aggravates me about that whole situation is like Louisiana has never changed. So people are being outraged and they're talking about, oh my God, what's going on in the country right now, you know, President Trump. And I work inside this administration as well. I've been to the White House 3 times working on criminal justice reform and do not agree with what is going on as a whole or as in a larger context. But I live in Louisiana. I don't know what bipartisan is. We live in a 100% Republican red state, has always been that way. We lost public schools in New Orleans 9 years ago. So for me, when certain things are happening, I'm like, oh, Trump is just trying to make the country like Louisiana, you know? So if I don't get up and I don't work every day under current climate and conditions, then that means that I can't work at home. So I have to pack up and lay down and go to sleep, right? So if we know that historically, you know, and Sharice has heard me say this before, but that if every institution that is in our country started in Benjamin Franklin's living room prior to abolition, the oldest prison, the oldest hospital, one of the oldest educational institutions, and that wasn't even set up for anyone except for white men, not let alone women and people of color. It was on the premise of white men, and this is what we hold as a gold standard. And we're trying to fix something that was never created for inclusivity to begin with. So for me, it's like, why in the hell, and I'm sorry because I cuss sometimes, I try to stop. So I'm apologizing in advance.
Don't worry about it, girl. It's all good.
But if we are going to try to fix some shit that is broken and was never created for us, like what the hell are we doing? So you have to start thinking outside of the box about what you're going to create, what is going to be different, and think of some things that have never happened before. Because, I mean, frankly, I'm tired of fixing what wasn't created for people who look like me, have the gender that I have, or whatever it is we're talking about. You know, and that's not to say that you're excluding white people or white men. It's not working for anybody. In Louisiana, our highest incarcerated population in our prisons right now on the rise are white women. There are more white women in Louisiana prison. Okay, yeah, the demographic is more white people than black people too. But I'm just saying, so it's like, it's not working for anybody, right? But going back to being disproportionately impacted, we do see that in New Orleans, in Jefferson Parish, in Louisiana, in Plaquemine Parish, and Caddo Parish, our 5 major parishes that feed our prison system or our urban major cities. And black and brown folks are going to prison at a disproportionate rate based on the per capita. But Louisiana, we've incarcerated the most people in the world, like not the country, like in the world per capita than anywhere. And now we're releasing people. We have this justice reinvestment component, and we've rearranged some things, but it's still no real change, no real effect. So if we're talking about where fines and fees and bail and all of these things began, it's just a way to enslave people that has just recreated itself. So it's the same by another name.
Well, it goes back to Michelle Alexander's whole point, the new Jim Crow. It's the same old stuff since colonialism, just repackaged, made to look pretty. Let's put a red ribbon on it. You know, let's just camouflage it. So I'm going to bring up the notion of money, because Sarita, you say, well, no, it doesn't, no one benefits. I beg to differ with you. The big insurance companies, you know, so let's break it down. I'm a CPA by training, so let's follow the money.
So I didn't say it didn't benefit. What I said was it's not working for
Oh,
anybody.
it is working for them. It is working for their shareholders. It's working for those who buy stock. It's working for those who have always had wealth. And so it still is supporting the construct of white supremacy. That when Benjamin Franklin and all the white guys were sitting around deciding how are we going to forge this new nation, it didn't include women, it didn't include people of color, it was about white men. And so until we really understand what that means, and finding your voice to say it out loud, because we suffer in silence. And rich people get richer. They're happy we don't speak out about it. So the fact that you're all here, don't leave Denver and not go back.
Oh.
You didn't shut the lights
Woo!
off.
I'm telling you now,
You
you
done shut
better
the lights
understand. I'm speaking truth here.
Yeah.
Don't leave PyCon and go back and be the same person you were before you got here. This is the time to examine yourselves individually. So, Krista, on the issue of money, you know, at the end of the day, what's it saying? Money talks? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Talk about the money. You talked about the savings, but the reinvestment. You've written off a lot of debt. How are people's lives being improved since you've said fees and fines are no longer driving the engine?
Yeah, I think, Sarita, this really, it gets to your point, where the people who are impacted by a lot of these fines and fees are often not at the table. And so I think we've struggled with, how do we have a conversation at the systems level that includes voices of people who are impacted to reform and re-envision what this looks like, while also trying to play fine and fee whack-a-mole, you know, as things pop up, trying to crack it back down. And what we've seen in some cases is that there is a mismatch in understanding. And so, for example, one of the things we worked on last year were the fees charged to people when they're exiting the criminal justice system. And so in San Francisco, it was $50 a month to be on probation, and everyone was assigned 3 years probation. It really didn't, it was just automatic. And so everyone was charged $1,800 up front, the day that they were sentenced or released. And that, in order to pay that, their wages were garnished, their bank accounts were levied, and it would prevent them from getting a business license or an occupational license. And so I spoke with person after person. One woman I spoke with exited jail, I think, 15 years ago. And she has been working 2 full-time jobs for 15 years and has not once taken home her full paycheck. And she's supporting both of her kids as she's working to pay off this probation debt. And she had a dream of becoming a CNA and getting her license to become a certified nursing assistant, but she couldn't get her CNA certification until she paid off the probation debt. She had done everything that we ask of people. She got out of jail, she reunited with her family, she got not just 1 job, but 2 full-time minimum wage jobs. She was doing her best to support her family, and we were putting up every possible barrier to her success. We were taking away any money she actually put into a savings. We were garnishing the money that she was earning so it couldn't go to her or her kids. We were taking away her opportunity to better her career. And so what type of rehabilitation system is that if we throw up every single possible barrier to basically keep a person in poverty? And so as this woman, Nicole, started talking to people who oversaw this system, I think in some cases they didn't realize it. They were like, oh yeah, we send you that $1,800 bill, but no one ever pays it. It just goes away.
Yeah. So Josh,
Yes.
you infiltrated the bail bonding business as an agent. You wanted to figure out what was the big draw in all of this. What was the most compelling thing that you learned that caused you to look at this business as something that is crippling our nation?
Wow.
Yeah, we're going deep here.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things was what I what I began the talk about. It was, I mean, often when we talk about bail, rightly, we talk about people who are in jail, can't afford to get out. That is a problem. It's a lot of men, but it's also increasingly a lot of women, right? But I just was not aware that there was this enormously large population of people being brought into this system, paying a lot of money, making really hard choices about rent or bail, right? That was being then surveilled by the company. You know, they're the ones that sign the contracts that say they're on the hook for everything. But also, it often would get people re-entangled in relationships they didn't even want to be in, right? It was regular for a person to say, I just got out of this damn relationship, but I got to get them out because I need him to help with childcare, or I need this. And it was reshaping these relationships in really problematic ways, right? I mean, so, you know, we don't want to really romanticize this care work sometimes too, because there's, you know, again, there's a reason why it's because we expect women to do all the care, most of the care work in this society, right? We
Okay,
say,
so Josh, in the black community, I just
Yeah.
got to say, most of the women do most of the care anyway.
exactly.
So I don't know if it's the same in other communities, but as I listen to you and you talk about women, it's marketing. It's like, where's the low-hanging fruit?
Absolutely.
You know, where am I going to get paid?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, and just another, I have an article on this in the app. I'll just keep pushing the app because I know they worked really hard on it and it's quite sexy. You know, one of the things that I found, so bail companies and agents will often talk to themselves as service providers, right? They get people out of jail. They help people with finding their way around, and they're right, they do. They do a lot of service, right? But what's really sad is the fact that people are having to rely on a for-profit company that's taking a lot of their money to rely on because they don't have private attorneys. Who are they going to call? The jail? Who are they going to call? The court, right? And so we've created this where they're dependent on them, right? People are dependent on their bail bond company to help them figure out, to get the information to figure out. You know, I would have people, again, primarily women mothers calling me every other day, when's so-and-so going to court, right? Has their bail changed? And I became the person they relied on. So again, thinking about not only the financial part, but just how sad it is that we have created a system where that people have to rely on this industry that is about wealth extraction to help them actually navigate the system, which was, to me, was just a sign of how desperate people were.
So, Sarita, I noticed. I got you. I got you. You know, you're sitting there and, you know, I'm saying to myself, I hear all of that. But you know what? In the moment that you're facing sitting in jail or going home, how much of what Josh is saying matters?
None. And I mean, another thing that we do at the organization is we run in partnership with another group, we bond people out. And I mentioned the 3 systems in New Orleans, but what's really frustrating is in criminal court, magistrate court, we can go and post a bond for someone and we get that money back, you know, once they show up and they go through the system. But in municipal court, it's not. It's like applied to their fine or their fee. So a lot of these bailouts or bond programs don't apply to municipal court because you can't get the money back. So a lot of times we'll have people that reach out and they'll say, oh, we want to donate money. And I'm like, do you care if you get your money back? And they're like, no. So then we go straight to municipal court where women are sitting. Myself, when I was arrested, I was sentenced to 120 months in federal prison, 20 years in state prison, $1.9 million in restitution. So for the last 20 years, and I'm still on parole, I don't get off of parole until 2020, I have been inactive for the last 7 years, but I pay $65 every month in parole fees, and I'm not being managed by anyone. I graduated from college upon my release. My degree is in clinical laboratory science, work in the hospital on transplant teams. I'm a supervisor, saving lives, couldn't vote, right? Every time I increase in my wealth, I get audited by the federal government, and my restitution payment goes up, right? So I'm financially stable now. It hasn't always been the case. I've had to choose between my son is sitting at the wall, doing things for my son, and paying to stay out of jail. and always paying to stay out of jail was in the forefront. Rent, all of those things have had to make those hard choices. So that's why we go in and we bond when we get money that's donated to bond out municipal court, because I walked in one day visiting the tier of women that are incarcerated, and a woman had been sitting there for 4 months for a $100 traffic ticket. So it's like, at what point does it make sense if we're gonna not incarcerate somebody, we're collecting more debt to incarcerate this person than the $100 we're trying to extract from them? So when you say follow the money, I feel like doing the same thing over and over and over, you know, there's a definition, it's called insanity. And I know in Louisiana, New Orleans, if you sue the city, you won't get paid, probably for 50 years.
That's with most cities, by the way.
Yeah, but so even if you think that you have this perceived amount of money that's on this dotted line, yes, the few private entities that are, like Josh said, extracting the money on the front end, behind, off of these women, their backs, the poor communities, and we feel the impacts. You know, for me, we passed a law in Louisiana in 2016. We did ban the box on college applications, because when I was released from from prison, I tried to apply to go to school, was denied the opportunity. So we come back and we changed the law, making Louisiana the first state to enact that type of legislation, and we just passed it in Colorado a few weeks ago. The state of Washington, Maryland, we're working to get it done. But the thing for that for me was, when we stood up and we talked about it and me testifying in front of the legislature, it wasn't received when I told my story. So we had to go out, we had to find a white woman who had the same story that I had, and she testified. She got a standing ovation.
Of course.
The legislators were crying. They patted her on her back, told her, hold her head up high. And in that moment, what I realized is that I couldn't take that personal.
Right.
Because if I took it personal, then I'm inefficient to all the people that I'm fighting for. And I was able in that moment to say, this is bigger than me. And if I have to connect this to white people, for white people to get on board, then that's what the hell I'm gonna do. So when I'm talking about the effects that it has on the communities as a whole, for me it's like everybody has to buy in and believe that this is affecting people. So when that 1%, when their daughter and their son gets in that trouble that they can't get out of, they're going to advocate to have it changed because they want to get their child. So for me, when I say it doesn't make sense and it's not working, it's because of the type of people that I see that are going into the system where I am living currently. But we all know white supremacy is rooted in not giving a damn about anybody else. So to keep appealing that this is the wrong thing is not working. We have to find a way that everybody is going to buy in.
Absolutely. So I want to take a moment to connect some dots here. Sarita talked about it. Krista, you mentioned it a little bit. So I want to talk about the connection between, and this is going back to intersections, and if you do nothing else, go back and study what it means to look at the intersections of life, and there are many, but those that take people's lives down and not up. Oftentimes by conditions they cannot change. The three of us, well, okay, let me take that back. You can't change it as easily. It's easier to change it these days than what it used to be. But to be a woman, to be black, to be poor, to be LGBTQ or SGL, let's look at the ways that we segment and divide society and what that means. So I'm going to talk about voting. I'm going to talk about, by show of hands, how many people in this room don't know who your local legislative representative is by name? Okay, don't be embarrassed. But I'm going to tell you something. If you're going to do this work, get to know the people who have responsibilities to change the systems under which we live. And it begins with the local representative you have. Know their name, because if you voted for them, know what they stand for. Know where they're getting their money from. This is a big election year coming up. Don't miss the opportunity to be vocal about someone, contact your legislators, local, state, and federal, when you leave here next week, and you ask them what's their position on ending cash money bails. Ask them what's their position on sentencing, fair sentencing. And if they skirmish, if they say, oh, get back to, if they don't respond at all, that's information you can't keep to yourself. Because if you do, you stand to have the same person in position suppressing the very things you're working hard for every day, which is a far more fair and just criminal justice system. It takes each and every one of us as individuals to do our part. Josh, you had a comment?
Oh, continue.
No, but this is very serious. This is very real. You know, everybody thinks that when you talk about the collective, that somebody's doing the work. And how many of you know that when they say, oh, yeah, we're doing that? Who? Get a name. Oh, yes, we supported that with what bill was it? Look for their name on it. Everybody's in social media. Put out there. Yes, my legislator has never supported ending cash money bails. As a citizen, as an individual. It's not about saying who you're going to vote for, who you're going to support. Quite frankly, I don't care who you vote for, but I want you to participate in the process. Our nation is governed by a minority vote. Did you know that? So, Sarita, you still don't have the right to vote.
Well, actually, the legislation was passed in Louisiana due to a lot of hard work over the past 5 years, that if you've been out of prison 5 years, you are able to vote. So I'll be voting for the first time in November.
Josh.
Yeah, I remember what I was going to say. And it goes back to the question you said, you know, what can be done? And often I hear that I get so overwhelmed. And so much of, we talk about this really heavy stuff, you know, and then, but as I'm hearing people talk up here and going around, I'm absolutely amazed by the amazing stuff people are doing, right? I mean, every time we talk, Colorado, we just did this. I mean, I just am curious, like, how many people in here are, you know, doing amazing stuff that just everybody I've been talking to, and I'm writing this book, it's a very heavy book, but we're including a chapter, as we have to, on political struggle, because every time you start studying these things you hear, I mean, and a lot of this is a moving target, because you have people along, you know, on everything, whether it be electronic monitoring or this stuff, every time you're like, there's this huge thing, and you realize, but they're changing it over here, or they're doing this, or they're doing that, and that's not to be, like, overly optimistic, it's just, it's really cool when you realize how many different people are fighting at different levels, state, local, that there's a lot of shit, pardon my language.
I gave you the right
Thank you. But I mean, just sitting here with, you know, you all, it's pretty damn inspiring. So I just sometimes want to just sit back and be like, yeah, there's actually a lot of cool, I mean, I'm just curious. Raise your hand if you're involved in like something really awesome.
I'm going to put a question out. I'll take a question from the audience. Is there someone in here with a burning question?
Before the question, I want to say one thing. It's really quick. We also have to change how we're viewing expertise in the country. So for me, directly impacted and formerly incarcerated people are the experts in being directly impacted and formerly incarcerated. So if they're not at the table, you're not truly fighting for them. It's the one entity for me that no one else participates in that has been directly impacted. If you need medical advice, you're going to a doctor. You're not going to go to an attorney for medical advice. You're not going to go to an attorney, you know, for anything other than legal advice. So why, when it comes to criminal justice reform or fighting in the criminal justice arena, we include everybody else at the table other than directly impacted people? And what I keep coming back to is somehow, some way, being incarcerated is synonymous with being unintelligent. And people do it subconsciously. I speak everywhere, and people, the first thing they tell me is, you are so articulate. And I'm like, well, why wouldn't I be? My major before I went to prison, I was on a full scholarship in physics and engineering. So how did me going to prison somehow make me unintelligent? So we really, really, really have to change what we view as experts in this space. That's what I wanted to say.
Questions? We got time for 1 or 2 questions? Okay.
I want to say thank
Tell
you.
us your name and who you are and where you're from.
My name is Tanisha Head, and I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, with the Ohio Organizing Collaborative. And I want to say thank you for the opportunity to be here. However, I wanted to know how exactly, or is there a way that we can all collaborate on the things that we're trying to get accomplished across the whole entire country? Because I noticed that there are people here from everywhere in the United States.
Put your question in PyCon app and start a following. Wait, it's just that simple. Put that question in the app. If you want to do more and connect, reach out.
Right.
Do it while you're here. You got a whole nother day and a half.
Okay.
Okay.
And you can always go to Operation Restoration's website, and we'll work with you. And we already work with Zaria, so we'll work with you and know how we'll start the connection.
And see, Sharice, that's the whole next thing beyond PyCon. Next, any other questions? No burning questions?
You told them put it in the app.
That's a good place for it to go. But while we're here, you know. So let me just say this. None of this happens without each individual looking within themselves to see, how important is this to me? How will this enhance my life? I promise you, if you're doing this work and you're willing to make that personal commitment, it's going to change your life, more so than it already has. It's just a matter of how you do it, connecting the dots. Thanks to Sharice, the National Association of Black County Officials have been working with the National Association of Counties to get the National Association of Counties, the oldest advocacy organization for the 3,069 counties across America, to adopt language in a platform that they take to Capitol Hill, that every county official will be saying, this is our position. It wasn't easy. It took us over a year, you know, but it's moving forward. And so there's a role for each of us to play. But understand, it starts on the ground and emanates upward. And now's the time for a groundswell movement, when, if nothing else, our nation is calling out for something different. Let us be the force of something different that changes what criminal justice reform looks like going forward. Give it up for all our panelists.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So thank you all. That was amazing. Winding, but amazing. Don't worry if you want to talk more about how to take this. You've heard the bondsman say the circle of love. Mm-hmm. Anyone not heard that? The claim that the bondsmen really bring a circle of love around the person who's been arrested and incarcerated, and it is their vital role to support that circle of love. So that's why we called the session after this the circle of love. So can we transfer this notion of, yes, it's kind of true in the white community too, women are just responsible for a lot, right? So can we take that notion of community care and actually turn that into community-based supports? So Josh is going to be in there, moderated that, and some folks from some community-based groups who are working on this, so that'll be a really great panel. I want to just say one more thing. So we, in the app, I'm just going to sit on the arm of your chair, white man. I'm just kidding.
That's fine.
We have a donate option in the app. I just want to say one thing about what if you've liked so far today. If you haven't, that's cool as well. You're not going to get your money back. This convening is ideologically independent of a funder. Do you know what that means? So nobody told us what the conference had to be. Nobody told us who we could and couldn't have on stage. Nobody told us what we could and couldn't say. And that's getting rarer and rarer as the Justice Department is out of criminal justice reform almost completely in the state and local work. And you have the big philanthropies who are great and some not so great, right? So I encourage you to keep supporting the opportunity for ideologically independent conversations and the ability to center the voices with impact, because it means a lot to us. It means a lot to folks to be able to have these kinds of conversations and to listen to Helen give a sermon. Can we get an amen for Helen? Okay, go to your break.